The folder landed on the glass conference table with a sound like a verdict being delivered. Victor Langston's hand rested on top of it for just a moment, long enough to make sure I understood what it meant before I touched it. The room was cold in the way expensive rooms always are. Floor-to-ceiling windows, leather chairs, a skyline view designed to remind you how small you are. Across the table sat my husband's family. People who had already written the ending to my story before I'd said a single word. Victor leaned back. "This is the cleanest solution for everyone," he said. Marcus still wasn't looking at me. Not once in the last 10 minutes. I placed my hand on the folder but didn't open it. I already knew what was inside. A settlement figure. A non-disclosure agreement. A politely worded instruction to disappear. They thought I was a charity case. A combat medic from a base in Georgia who had somehow wandered into their world and refused to leave. What they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that my grandfather had left me controlling interest in the technology firm that supplied 40% of Langston Capital's entire investment portfolio. And the moment that folder touched the table, I stopped being someone they were trying to remove. I became the most dangerous person in the room. But to understand how we got there, you have to go back to the beginning. Back before the glass tower and the settlement agreement. Back to a Tuesday afternoon in Savannah, Georgia, when a man in a tailored jacket sat down across from me at a diner counter and ordered black coffee like he owned the place. My name is Nadia Osei. I'm 34 years old. I serve as a combat medic with the United States Army, currently based outside Fort Stewart. If you drove past my apartment, you'd keep driving. 2-bedroom unit in a complex full of military families. Second-hand furniture. A bookshelf built from old crates. A wall of medical textbooks and one photograph of my grandfather standing in front of the building he built from nothing in Accra before he ever set foot in America. I've always lived simply. Not because I had to. Because my grandfather taught me that the only people who truly understand money are the ones who respect it enough not to need it on display. Marcus and I met 3 years ago at a diner called Pearls near the base. I was in uniform, halfway through a plate of grits and eggs before a 12-hour shift. He was in a suit that cost more than my monthly rent, sitting at the counter like he'd taken a wrong turn and decided to stay. He looked over. "Mind if I sit here?" "Every other stool is empty," I said. He smiled. "I know." He sat anyway. We talked for almost 2 hours. He had an easy confidence about him, the kind that comes from a life where most doors open before you knock. He asked about the Army. I told him field medicine wasn't glamorous, but it was real. He said most real things aren't glamorous. I thought that was an interesting thing for a man in that suit to say. Before he left, he said, "I've met a lot of people in this city. You're the first one in a while who surprised me." I didn't ask why. He called the next day. 3 months later we were inseparable. 6 months after that he told me about his family. "My father runs Langston Capital," he said. I nodded like it was ordinary. That night I looked it up. Langston Capital was one of the largest private equity firms in the Southeast. Infrastructure, technology, real estate. Billions under management. Marcus was the only son of Victor Langston, the heir to all of it. The next time I saw him he was waiting for my reaction to change. It didn't. That seemed to confuse him more than anything I could have said. Here's what Marcus never thought to ask. My grandfather, James Osei, came to America from Ghana in 1971 with $40 and a degree in electrical engineering that no firm in Atlanta would honor. So he built his own firm. Quietly, methodically, over 40 years. By the time I was born, he had sold 3 companies and invested the proceeds into a technology infrastructure company called CoreLink Systems. CoreLink built the back-end data architecture for half the financial firms in the Southeast, including, as it happened, Langston Capital. When my grandfather died 2 years before I met Marcus, he left me everything. Not my parents, not the relatives who had married into comfort and forgotten where the family came from. Me. His granddaughter who joined the Army instead of business school because she wanted to earn something with her hands first. He left a letter with the inheritance. It said, "You are the only one who never asked me what you were getting. So you get everything." I never told Marcus. Not because I wanted to deceive him. Because my grandfather's voice lived in my head like a compass. Let people show you who they are before you show them who you are. Marcus saw my apartment, my uniform, my second-hand couch, and he loved me anyway. Or so I believed. We got married in a small ceremony outside Savannah. His parents didn't attend. They were traveling, Marcus said. My father walked me down an aisle strung between 2 oak trees, And Marcus looked at me like I was the only real thing in his life. For a while I believed that was enough. The dinner invitation arrived 4 months into our marriage. Victor and Sylvia Langston would like you to join them this Saturday. I noticed the phrasing immediately. Not us. Like I was being summoned for evaluation. Marcus drove us to the family estate outside Augusta in his black Range Rover. The house sat at the end of a long private road behind iron gates and manicured grounds. Inside, everything was curated. Art on the walls, staff moving quietly through rooms, a dining table set for 4 that could have seated 20. Sylvia Langston met us in the foyer. Tall, silver-haired, immaculate. She looked at me the way doctors look at X-rays, searching for the problem. Nadia, she said. Her smile was technically present. Victor appeared from a hallway. He was larger than I expected. The kind of man who fills a room by habit. He shook my hand firmly. Heard a lot about you. Good things, I hope, I said. He didn't answer that. We sat down to dinner. The questions started politely enough. Your family is originally from Ghana? My grandfather was, yes. And your parents? My father teaches high school chemistry. My mother is a nurse. Victor nodded. And you chose the military? Yes, sir. Sylvia tilted her head. Over college? I have 2 degrees, I said. She blinked. Marcus shifted. Mom, I told you. Sylvia raised a hand slightly. Of course, she said. The meal continued. Every question was a measurement. By the time dessert arrived, I understood with complete clarity what this dinner actually was. Not a welcome. An audit. Then Victor stood, walked to a sideboard and returned with a slim leather folder. He placed it in front of me without ceremony. I think this reflects our respect for you, he said. Sylvia folded her hands. We want to handle this privately. Marcus looked at the table. I looked at my husband. He said nothing. I opened the folder. Inside was a settlement offer. $300,000. A non-disclosure agreement. And a single-page document from the Langston family attorneys titled Voluntary Separation and Release of Claims. They were paying me to end my marriage. Quietly. Before it complicated anything further. I closed the folder. My pulse didn't change. Years of combat medicine teach you that. The moment when everything is wrong is exactly when you cannot afford to feel it. I looked at Victor. You had this prepared before I arrived tonight. He didn't deny it. Sylvia said, we're protecting our family. I looked at Marcus. He was looking at the chandelier. I stood up. Thank you for dinner, I said. Victor frowned. Nadia, I held up one hand. Just one thing before I go. He waited. You might want to have your legal team look at CoreLink systems. Something moved behind Victor's eyes. Small. Careful. Shouldn't. I left the folder on the table, nodded to Sylvia and walked out into the night alone. My grandfather's attorney was a man named Edwin Park. 70 years old, 3-piece suits. The patience of a man who had spent half a century watching powerful people make avoidable mistakes. I met him the next morning in his Atlanta office. He set a cup of tea in front of me and listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, your grandfather always believed the Langstons would eventually meet their mirror. He opened his desk drawer and removed a file. Your grandfather bought controlling interest in CoreLink Systems in 1998, he said. At the time, Langston Capital was one of CoreLink's first institutional clients. CoreLink built the data infrastructure that Langston Capital still runs on today. I know that part, I said. Edwin slid a page across the desk. What you may not fully appreciate is this. I looked down. Shareholder summary. My name. CoreLink Systems. Controlling interest 53%. Edwin folded his hands. CoreLink processes approximately 42% of Langston Capital's trade execution and client data management. If CoreLink were to restructure its service agreements, the operational impact on Langston Capital would be, he paused, significant. Victor Langston offered you $300,000, Edwin said quietly. He does not know that you own the company his entire business depends on. The silence in that office was very full. I don't want to destroy their business, I said. Edwin nodded. I know that. So what do you want? I want them to understand something. He waited. That my grandfather arrived here with $40 and built something the most powerful family in this city cannot function without. And they handed his granddaughter a folder and told her to disappear. Edwin studied me for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. Langston Capital has a board review in 11 days, he said. As controlling shareholder of a primary service vendor, you have the right to request attendance. Let's do that, I said. The Langston Capital offices occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown Atlanta. That morning I walked in through the main entrance in my dress uniform, Edwin beside me in his 3-piece suit. The receptionist looked up. Edwin placed his card on the desk. Edwin Park, counsel for Nadia Osei, controlling shareholder of CoreLink Systems. We're here for the board review. She picked up the phone. I heard her say, Mr. Langston, Edwin Park is downstairs with, a pause with a Ms. Osei. She's listed as the CoreLink controlling shareholder. Another pause. Yes, sir. She set the phone down and smiled carefully. You may go up. The elevator opened onto a boardroom where 12 people sat around a long glass table. Victor stood at the head speaking to 2 senior partners. Marcus sat near the middle with a stack of documents in front of him. When the doors opened, the conversation stopped in the way that conversations stop when something unexpected has walked into the room. Victor turned. His expression moved through 3 stages in about 2 seconds. Confusion. Recognition. Something close to vertigo. Ms. Osei, he said. Mr. Langston. Edwin set a folder on the table. Ms. Osei holds controlling interest in CoreLink Systems. As a primary vendor to this firm, she has standing to observe this review. One of the senior partners cleared his throat. Yes, that's correct. Victor looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at me. Not with anger. With the expression of a man watching 2 separate parts of his life collide in slow motion and being unable to stop either one. Edwin and I took the 2 empty seats. The meeting resumed, but the room had changed. Every person at that table now understood that the woman Victor Langston had tried to remove from his family for $300,000 was sitting in his boardroom as the controlling owner of infrastructure his firm could not operate without. The meeting ran 90 minutes. Near the end, a senior partner named Dr. Christine Addo leaned forward. Ms. Osei, she said, are there any concerns from CoreLink's side regarding the current service agreements? I looked at her steadily. Not at this time, I said. She nodded. Good. When the meeting ended, the room cleared slowly. Victor asked 4 people to stay. Marcus, his lead attorney, Edwin, and me. Victor looked older than he had at dinner. Not physically. Just in the way a man looks when the ground he was certain of has quietly shifted beneath him. I owe you an explanation, he said. Edwin spoke before I could. I believe you owe my client considerably more than that. Victor looked at me directly. How long have you known about the CoreLink connection? Since my grandfather died. He was quiet. He never told Marcus. I wanted to be known for who I am. Victor sat down slowly. He placed both hands flat on the table. I spent 30 years building this firm, he said. I know, I said. And you assumed that because I came from less, I had less to offer. He didn't argue. Marcus spoke then. His voice was low. That, he said. That dinner was wrong. Victor looked at his son. We were protecting the family. You were protecting an assumption, Marcus said. That's different. Edwin closed his folder. James Osei built CoreLink Systems over 40 years, he said quietly. He invested in this firm before it was worth investing in. He never once leveraged his position. He simply believed in building things carefully and letting them speak. He left everything to his granddaughter. Not because she was the wealthiest, because she was the only one who never asked what she was getting. Victor looked at his hands. Then at me. I misjudged you. Yes, I said. You did. I looked at the folder still sitting on the table. But more than that, you misjudged what matters. Marcus stood and walked toward me. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said. I've resigned from the firm. Victor looked up sharply. I've been in contact with a legal nonprofit that works with veterans on medical discharge claims and benefits denials, Marcus said. He kept his eyes on me. Turns out there are a lot of soldiers who need lawyers more than corporations do. For the first time since that dinner, I felt something loosen in my chest. You'd walk away from all of this? He looked around the boardroom. I'd walk away from a life where I let my father hand my wife a folder instead of standing up for her. You'll have to rebuild my trust, I said. I know. It'll take time. I'm not going anywhere, he said. That answer was steady in a way that his voice hadn't been in months. Edwin stood and buttoned his jacket. I think that concludes our business. Victor looked at him. Will CoreLink be reviewing its service agreements? Edwin glanced at me. I shook my head once. Not at this time, he said. Victor exhaled. Then quietly he said, your grandfather was a serious man. I know, I said. Edwin and I walked out. In the elevator he looked at me. How do you feel? Like myself, I said. He smiled. Good. That's exactly how your grandfather would have wanted you to feel. That evening I drove to my father's house in Decatur. He was in the backyard watering tomato plants he'd been tending since spring. He looked up as I came through the gate. You look like someone who just finished something difficult, he said. I sat down on the porch steps. He turned off the hose and came to sit beside me. I told him everything. He listened the way he always did without rushing toward a response. When I finished he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, your grandfather would have approved. Not of the confrontation, I said. Of the patience, he replied. Money, he said after a moment, is just information. What you do with it tells people who you are. I thought about Victor Langston's hand on that folder. About Marcus in the boardroom saying I'm not going anywhere. About Edwin reading the shareholder summary with the care of someone delivering something that had waited a long time to be said. Information. All of it. But the information that mattered most wasn't in any folder or any shareholder document. It was in the letter my grandfather left me. You are the only one who never asked what you were getting. So you get everything. I stayed for dinner. Chicken, rice, the same meal my father had made every Sunday since I was small. Before I left he pulled me into a hug. You did right by him, he said. I know, I said. I just hope I do right by what comes next. He stepped back and looked at me. You will, he said. Not as reassurance. As a statement of observed fact. 2 months later, Marcus and I sat across from Victor and Sylvia Langston at a small restaurant in Savannah, half a mile from Pearl's Diner where Marcus and I had first met. No folders. No attorneys. No settlement figures. Just 4 people at a table trying to find a way to be honest with each other. Sylvia spoke first. I want to apologize, she said. Her voice was careful but real. I made assumptions about you that I had no right to make. I appreciate that, I said. Victor looked at his coffee. Then up at me. A man builds something quietly over 40 years without needing recognition and leaves it to someone who approaches life the same way. He paused. He must have understood something I clearly didn't. What's that? Victor said. That character and capital are not the same thing. The table was quiet. Then Marcus reached across and took my hand. And I let him. Because rebuilding trust is not a single moment. It is a decision made every day in small ways long after the dramatic ones are over. My grandfather knew that. He built CoreLink systems one careful decision at a time over 40 years and never once needed anyone in a glass tower to tell him what he was worth. Neither did I. And if this story reminded you that the people most worth knowing are rarely the ones who lead with what they have, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Because the best ones are always still being written.